Hello and welcome to Taiwan Today. I am Natalie. So I'm delighted to have with me a power couple in the world of academia, Professor Harry Harding and Shirley Lin. Shirley Lin is the author of Taiwan's China Dilemma, and Harry Harding is the author of many books about China, and they are visiting professors here at National Zhenzi University. We're going to get their thoughts on cross-strait relations. Well, in the beginning of this year, President Xi Jinping had a very hardline speech about Taiwan wanting to reunify Taiwan with China. So, Shirley, what do you think of that speech and what Xi Jinping was trying to express?
I think many people feel that this was perhaps one of the strongest speeches by Chinese leaders toward Taiwanese people and the Taiwan government. However, if you look at the content of the speech, it was pretty much emphasizing the existing policy. However, Xi Jinping did do something that is more emphatic. For example, saying that China will not renounce the use of force, but more importantly, to talk about one country, two system and unification in the same speech as the 1992 consensus has resulted actually in quite a response on the Taiwan side by both the government and the people, especially the younger generation. So I think that Xi Jinping has created some unintended consequences, if you will.
That's right. He connected the 1992 consensus with one country, two systems, which was not directly connected before. Right. So what do you think about what he said?
I think that's right. I think that the 92 consensus, if we think back to 91 when it was formulated, that was a time when both governments were committed to eventual unification. And I think that's what made the consensus possible. And obviously times have changed on Taiwan. But I think that Xi Jinping was emphasizing, and we've heard this in meetings in China, that maybe we don't call it the 92 consensus, but whatever the Taiwan government comes up with as an alternative formula has to involve the idea, not just one China in theory, but unification as the goal. And that obviously is going to be difficult to state that bluntly here on Taiwan, given the change in Taiwanese identity.
Right, and President Taiwan came back to say, the Taiwan Consensus is that, we cannot accept one country, two systems.
I think that's a very interesting point in that not only President Tsai, who surprisingly then saw her ratings go up dramatically, but also the KMT came out to draw a line in the sand to say that they also did not support the one country, two system. So I think what has happened in the last 30 years is very notable in that the one country, two system does not have an audience anymore in Taiwan. This is the last 20 years since Hong Kong's handover. It is obvious that the results are not satisfactory to the Hong Kong people and definitely not a model for unification for the Taiwanese. If there was any chance of increase of support for unification. And at the moment, after Xi Jinping came to power, more and more Taiwanese and more Hong Kong young people are saying that they are of a separate identity. And support for unification has not changed substantially. So I think that the hardline position Xi Jinping toes may be important for an internal audience, but in terms of the effect on cross-strait relations, I think the gap is actually growing.
And Harry, do you think that President Xi Jinping has a timetable for reunification?
Well, that of course is the $64 question, as we call it. Several dates have been put forward. 2049 is the one that makes the most sense to me. If there is a timetable, that would be the anniversary of the establishment of the People's Republic in 1949. Maybe another way of looking at it, which raises the question of how long he'll be in office, is that he would like it to happen while he is in office as his greatest achievement. What we do know is that the leadership in Beijing for some time has realized that time is not not necessarily entirely on their side. Yes, they're becoming stronger, but the sense of a separate identity and now the resistance to unification is also becoming stronger. So I think that there will be a variety of pressures to, as I think Xi himself has said it, to make sure this issue doesn't go on generation after generation, but to resolve it fairly soon.
And you've been here as visiting scholars in Taiwan. I know you also spent time in Hong Kong.
Yes.
How would you compare the attitudes of the people of Taiwan and of Hong Kong towards China?
Why don't we start with Shirley, because she writes on this more than I do.
In the last 21 years, since Hong Kong's handover in 1997, at the beginning, actually, more and more people felt increasingly patriotic, and more people started to change their sense of identity from being both a Chinese and a Hong Konger to becoming more Chinese. Now, part of the reason may also be that there are more and more immigrants coming from China to Hong Kong, who of course identify more with being Chinese. But since 2008, the peak of this patriotic trend, if you will, it has been declining steadily and gradually. And it's really precipitated, especially after the 2014 umbrella movement in Hong Kong, where young people wanted a different way of a civic nomination for their leaders. The government stonewalled the students and did not give in. And in addition to that, many of the students who turned into political leaders have been arrested, and this is very disconcerting. On the Taiwan side, I think similar trends is that more and more young people believe that they are Taiwanese and not both Chinese and Taiwanese, and definitely not Chinese. I think these are data that Beijing totally understands and sees. But to reverse this is very difficult.
And do you have anything to add,
Yeah, I was
Harry?
just going to add that I think that Beijing seems to think that what matters most to people is money, is material conditions. And that's what they argue to both Taiwan and to Hong Kong, that basically your economies are in the high income trap and you need the relationship with China to get out of it. And don't think about politics, don't think about values, just think about material benefit. And that is not the way everyone thinks in high-income societies in particular. Xi Jinping, I think the most interesting line in his speech was when he said that the differences in political system should not be a pretext for avoiding unification. Well, certainly,
That's
I don't
the
think
pretext.
I don't think people in Taiwan or Hong Kong see it as a pretext. They see it as what they really believe. And that's the problem. To really turn things around, I think that China needs to change in a more open direction, and Xi Jinping seems to be moving backward on that rather than forward.
I think that's a very important point that I'd like to add to, which is democracy and a way of life are what in my book I say I call consumatory values, values that consume you, that you would not compromise on, and therefore it's not a pretext. And more importantly, in terms of this ultimate contradiction, which is how to live in a democratic society under Beijing's rule, I think this is something that Beijing needs to be much more thoughtful about in talking to young people. And you had asked us what we thought of our 100 days. I came up with my conclusion, which is young people in Taiwan, this is one point that is not similar to Hong Kong young people. Young people in Taiwan are extremely interested in having opportunities in China to live and work, but not to be there permanently, because they value their freedom, they value their the opportunity to look at Instagram, Snapchat, and use Spotify and Facebook. So it's okay for the short term for opportunities, but ultimately their values are very much all about freedom. Therefore, I think they are what I call pragmatic idealists. They're very pragmatic, but they're extremely idealistic. They care about the environment. They care about food safety. Many of the students I taught are vegetarian or vegan, and they care about our energy policy here in Taiwan.
And what do you think about the Taiwanese attitude towards China, the people that you've come in contact with?
Well, I think it varies. I think that some identify more with China than others, although the ratio is shifting toward identification with Taiwan. But as Shirley says, there is an understanding that there's a lot of opportunity there, but that doesn't mean that they want to live under the control of Beijing, and they see that that's what is happening to Hong Kong. It's not just the opportunity for deeper economic integration, but along with that is coming greater political control.
So it seems like the two sides actually have very different outlooks.
Yes, they
President Xi believes that it doesn't matter, we'll be fine if we reunite, whereas the Taiwanese don't want to be under China. So do you think that this will lead to eventual conflict, a military conflict?
Well, it could. We certainly hope not, but I think that if China gets more impatient, feels that it has to resolve the issue by a certain date, or that the trends are moving irrevocably away from them, and if they can't come up with more effective ways of changing, of winning hearts and minds, as we used to call it, here on Taiwan, that is a possibility.
I think that one difference, Natalie, is that in China, the narrative of Taiwan being part of the rejuvenation of the Chinese dream is top-down, and therefore has the opportunity to actually be transformed if the leaders were to be more innovative and creative in their solutions to the cross-strait impasse. Whereas in Taiwan, the more difficult part is Taiwanese feeling this way is a bottom-up as well as a top-down. There's two sides to this, and it's much harder to change people's way of thinking when it's bottom-up, because it's rooted in individuals and communities who have developed some sense of values over time. So I think this gap is going to be difficult to bridge unless the Communist Party understands how to reach out to civil society, and they have been reaching out a little bit more under Xi Jinping the last 2 years, but again in a top-down way. And I think the final thing is to say that actually my view of the conflict is that China does not want to use force, but its inability to renounce force is becoming a real obstacle to any kind of negotiation. But the reason that Taiwan is not likely to trigger an immediate war is because China now is much more ambitious than 40 years ago. Taiwan is a core interest, but not the only core interest. East China Sea, South China Sea. China wants to be many, many more things, and reunification is only one of the goals.
And do you think that the U.S. would come to Taiwan's aid?
I think under the present situation it would. How we would come to Taiwan's aid is unclear to me. I think it also always we have to remember that it depends on how a conflict started. If Taiwan did something like unilaterally declaring independence, I'm not sure the United States would be so eager to defend it against the consequences of that action, which have been signaled very clearly by Beijing for a very long time. If it is simply a situation where Beijing loses its patience and decides to use force, I think the United States would do something, but precisely what would depend upon the circumstances.
Okay, well, there's definitely a lot for us to keep watching, right?
Yes,
as the
so.
situation unfolds. Thank you so much for joining us today. I've been speaking with Professors Harry Harding and Shirley Lin. They are visiting professors at National Zhenzi University. They also teach at the University of Virginia. Shirley Lin is the author of Taiwan's China Dilemma, and Harry Harding has authored many books about China. Thanks for tuning in to Taiwan Today. I'm Natalie So.